The small town where Daniel lived had not felt like home for many years. The brick houses, the familiar oak trees along the sidewalks, the little corner cafe where he and his younger brother once spent their afternoons, all of it seemed like shadows of another life. Each place carried a memory, and each memory pressed down on him like an invisible weight. Daniel's younger brother, Ethan, had been more than just family. He had been his best friend, his partner in every childhood adventure, and the person who could make him laugh even in his darkest moods. Ethan had always wanted to serve, always dreamed of wearing the uniform and standing tall for his country. And while Daniel had admired that courage, he had also feared it. Deep down, he had always known the battlefield was unforgiving. Then came the day the dreaded knock arrived. Daniel still remembered every detail: the stiff uniforms of the officers who stood on his porch, the practiced sorrow in their voices, the way the world seemed to tilt and crumble when they told him Ethan had been killed during combat overseas. There had been no warning, no chance to say goodbye. Just like that, his brother was gone, and with him, a piece of Daniel's own soul. The months that followed were a blur of grief. Daniel went through the motions of life, working a job he no longer cared about, sitting alone at the dinner table, and waking in the middle of the night drenched in sweat from dreams he could not control. He would dream of Ethan calling out for help, of running through a battlefield that he could never quite reach in time. When he woke, the silence of the house mocked him. What haunted him most was the guilt. Ethan had asked him, months before deployment, to come with him to enlist. Daniel had declined, saying he was not built for war. "You've got the courage, not me." Daniel had laughed at the time, thinking it would be nothing more than a passing conversation. But when Ethan died, those words came back like poison. If he had been there, would things have turned out differently? Could he have saved his brother? The questions gnawed at him until his reflection in the mirror became that of a stranger. Friends tried to comfort him. They invited him out, encouraged him to meet people, even pushed him to attend support groups. Some days he went, but he never stayed long. It was easier to sit at home, staring at Ethan's old photographs, than to pretend that he was moving. It was on one of those days, while sitting silently in a cafe with his old friend Michael, that the subject of the military canine adoption program came up. Michael, a former Marine, had adopted a retired military dog a year earlier. He spoke about it with warmth, saying the dog had helped him heal in ways people never could. "You should think about it, Daniel," Michael said gently, sipping his coffee. "These dogs, they've been through battles too. They've seen things, lost people they trusted, just like us. Taking one in, it's not just about saving them. Sometimes, they save you." Daniel shook his head at first. The idea felt foreign, almost absurd. How could a dog heal a wound so deep, so raw, so tied to the memory of his brother? But later that night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, the thought returned. Perhaps there was truth in what Michael had said. Perhaps the silence that filled his home could be broken by the sound of paws on the floor, by the steady breath of a companion who understood loss in a way few humans ever could. Still, doubt lingered. Daniel feared that adopting a dog from Ethan's world, the military world, would only remind him of everything he had lost. But another part of him, small yet insistent, whispered that maybe it could be different. Maybe it could be a step toward healing. toward finally finding a way to live again without drowning in grief. That whisper grew louder in the following weeks. Eventually, with hesitant resolve, Daniel decided to visit the adoption center. He told himself he would only look, that he was under no obligation to bring a dog home. But somewhere deep down, he knew this visit could change everything. The day Daniel finally gathered the courage to visit the military canine adoption center was gray and overcast, as though the sky itself was reluctant to shine. He drove in silence, the hum of his car engine the only sound filling the space around him. His chest tightened the closer he got, every mile stirring up a mixture of dread and curiosity. He told himself he was only going to look, nothing more. Yet, beneath that fragile reasoning, there was something heavier at work, an instinct tugging at him, urging him forward. The facility was modest, tucked away on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a tall chain-link fence and fields that stretched toward the horizon. A faded sign near the entrance read, Veteran Canine Transition Program. Honoring service, offering new homes. As Daniel stepped out of the car, he was greeted by the faint chorus of barks echoing from inside the kennels. The sounds were not the playful yips of ordinary dogs at a shelter. They were deeper, sharper, voices of creatures that had known discipline, danger, and loyalty. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of disinfectant mixed with the musk of fur. The halls were lined with kennels, each containing a dog with eyes that seemed to tell a story. Some paced anxiously, their nails clicking against the concrete floor. Others sat quietly, watching every movement with a soldier's patience. A handler, dressed in fatigues, approached Daniel with a polite nod. He was a middle-aged man with weathered features, the kind that spoke of years of service and the burden of memories that never quite left. "First time here?" the handler asked, his voice steady but kind. "Yes," Daniel said quietly, his eyes scanning the rows of kennels. The handler walked alongside him, gesturing toward the dogs. "Each one of these has served. They've been trained to detect explosives, to protect their units, to guard men and women in uniform. Some of them, they've saved lives. And like the soldiers they served with, they carry scars, some on the outside, most on the inside." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He glanced into the kennels, noticing the unique presence of each animal. These were not ordinary pets waiting for a home. They were veterans in their own right, carrying invisible medals of honor. As he moved further down the row, his steps slowed. In the last kennel on the right, a large German shepherd sat calmly, his posture regal and composed. Unlike the others, he did not pace or bark. His eyes, dark and steady, fixed on Daniel with an intensity that sent a strange chill through him. There was something almost human about the dog's gaze, and awareness, a quiet strength. Daniel found himself kneeling, instinctively, as though pulled by an unseen force. The shepherd tilted his head slightly, his ears twitching, and for a fleeting second, Daniel could have sworn the animal recognized him. "This one's special," the handler said, stopping beside him. "Loyal to the bone. He's been through a lot. But he's steady, strong, a kind of dog who doesn't give up on his person." Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing against the metal bars. The shepherd moved closer, pressing his nose against the space between. There was no aggression, only calm acceptance, as if inviting Daniel into a quiet bond that required no words. The handler knelt, pulling something from his pocket. "Here, take a look. We keep their service tags attached to their collars. Piece of their history. Some families like to keep them as keepsakes." He held out a small, worn collar tag, its surface scratched from years of use. Daniel accepted it, his hand trembling slightly, as his eyes fell upon the engraving. His heart seemed to stop. "Ethan," the letters stared back at him, stark and undeniable. Daniel froze. The air around him thickened, the walls of the kennel seeming to close in. His breath caught in his throat, and the sounds of barking from the other dogs faded into silence. All he could see was the name, his brother's name, etched into the cold metal. The tag trembled in his grasp. His mind raced, torn between disbelief and an ache so deep it felt unbearable. Of all the names in the world, of all the dogs he could have stopped at, it had to be this one. His vision blurred as tears gathered in his eyes. Memories of Ethan flooded him, the way his brother used to call his name across the yard when they were kids. The letters he had sent home during deployment. The last photograph they had taken together before everything fell apart. It was too much, too coincidental, too piercing. Daniel clutched the tag tightly, his knees weak beneath him. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a broken whisper. "Ethan." The shepherd pressed his nose harder against the bars, letting out a soft, almost mournful sound, as though echoing Daniel's pain. And in that moment, man and dog shared a silence heavy with grief, recognition, and something deeper. Invisible thread binding them together. Daniel could hardly drive home that day. The collar tag sat in the passenger seat beside him, its scratched metal glinting faintly whenever the light caught it. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Every time he glanced at the name engraved on that piece of metal, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into a wound that had never healed. He had told himself it was coincidence. Names were repeated all the time. Surely there were thousands of Ethans in the world. But coincidence did not explain the way the German shepherd had looked at him, as though it knew something. As though it recognized him in a way no stranger should. For hours after returning home, Daniel paced his living room. The silence that usually felt suffocating was now unbearable. He could almost hear the dog's soft whine in his head, the sound it had made at the kennel when he whispered his brother's name. That sound would not leave him, echoing in the empty corners of the house. Finally, long past midnight, he picked up his phone and dialed the number the handler had given him. His voice was shaky, but steady enough to make the request. "I want to foster him. The shepherd, Ethan." 2 days later, Daniel found himself back at the center, signing paperwork and listening to the handler explain the dog's history. He served overseas for 3 tours, the man said, flipping through a file. "Loyal as they come. Saved his unit more than once by detecting explosives before anyone else could. He's disciplined, obedient, but he's got a soft side, too." The men who served with him said he had this uncanny way of sensing when someone was in distress. Daniel swallowed hard at that last part. Distress. The words seemed to hang in the air, circling him like a shadow. He wondered if the dog had sensed his, even through the metal bars of the kennel, when they finally brought the shepherd out. Daniel's heart nearly gave out. The dog walked with a steady, dignified gait, his tail neither tucked nor wagging wildly, just a quiet confidence in his steps. His eyes locked on Daniel, and without hesitation he approached, pressing his head gently against Daniel's leg. The handler smiled. "Looks like he's chosen you already." Daniel knelt, running a hand through the thick fur along the shepherd's neck. The dog leaned into the touch, releasing a deep sigh that sounded almost like relief. For the first time in years, Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest, faint, hesitant but real. That night, the dog lay curled on the floor beside Daniel's couch, his steady breathing filling the silence. Daniel sat awake, staring at him, the tag still clutched in his hand. Every so often, the dog's ears twitched at the sound of Daniel shifting, as though he refused to let him out of his awareness. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Daniel noticed how the dog reacted to certain words that had once been part of Ethan's vocabulary. When Daniel accidentally muttered "buddy" under his breath, the dog's ears perked up, and he immediately padded over, resting his head on Daniel's knee. That was the exact nickname Ethan had always used for Daniel. Another evening, while Daniel was cooking, he dropped a spoon and instinctively cursed under his breath. To his shock, the shepherd trotted into the kitchen and sat firmly at attention, as though responding to a command. Daniel blinked, his chest tightening. Ethan, the soldier, used to say that very phrase when he was irritated. Daniel had heard it 100 times growing up. Could the dog have learned it from him? The most unsettling moment came one morning when Daniel woke from a nightmare. He had dreamt of Ethan again, lying wounded, calling his name. Daniel bolted upright, drenched in sweat, his breath ragged. And there, beside his bed, sat the shepherd, staring at him with those calm, steady eyes. The dog had not barked, had not whined, he had simply been there, as if standing guard. Slowly, he climbed onto the bed uninvited, lying beside Daniel until his trembling subsided. Daniel buried his face in the shepherd's fur, whispering through tears, "Why does it feel like you know him? Why does it feel like you're carrying a part of him with you?" The dog said nothing, of course, yet his presence spoke volumes. Every wag of his tail, every steady breath, every moment of watchfulness, Daniel felt as though Ethan himself was somehow near, reaching across the gulf of death to remind him he was not alone. And yet, with every moment of connection, Daniel's conflict deepened. Was this truly fate, or just his grief twisting reality, making him see signs where none existed? Could he really allow himself to believe that this dog was a link to his brother, or was he just setting himself up for more pain? The questions tormented him, pulling him between hope and despair. But no matter how much he tried to resist, one truth became undeniable. The shepherd named Ethan had already begun to heal a wound that Daniel thought would never close. Weeks passed, and life inside Daniel's home began to shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The empty silence that had once weighed on him like a stone was now softened by the sound of paws clicking across hardwood, by the steady rhythm of breathing at night, by the occasional low bark that startled him before making him smile. He found himself talking aloud again, sometimes to himself, but more often to the shepherd. At first, it was hesitant, casual words, muttered questions, but the dog's unwavering presence invited more. Soon Daniel was sharing pieces of his day, memories of Ethan, even his own fears. The shepherd never judged, never interrupted, never left his side, And though Daniel knew he was speaking into the void, a part of him believed that the dog was listening, absorbing, understanding. One evening, while brushing the shepherd's coat, Daniel noticed the scars. Thin, jagged lines ran across the dog's side, just beneath the fur. His heart clenched as he traced them with trembling fingers. These were not accidents of play or age, they were battle scars etched by shrapnel or gunfire. The realization hit him like a blow. This dog had not just been near war, he had survived it. That night, unable to quiet the storm in his head, Daniel pulled out the adoption paperwork and began reading through every page. Most of it was standard procedure vaccine records, training notes, medical clearances, but tucked at the back was a thin file of service reports. His eyes scanned the lines until one entry made his pulse quicken. Unit deployment, 53rd Infantry Division, Kandahar Province. Daniel's breath caught. That was Ethan's division. He read on, his hands shaking. The file mentioned operations, patrols, and engagements with insurgents. And then he saw it, a single paragraph, brief but devastating. Handler Kia during ambush. Canine Ethan remained at side, attempted to shield. Extracted by surviving unit members. The words blurred as tears filled Daniel's eyes. He read them again and again, his heart hammering in his chest. Handler Kie. That meant the soldier assigned to the dog, his partner in combat, had been killed. And the dog, Ethan, had stayed. He had not run. He had not abandoned. He had tried to shield his partner, absorbing the chaos of that moment in his own body. Daniel sat frozen, the papers trembling in his grip. Slowly, pieces began to fall into place. His brother Ethan had been in that division. His brother had been killed during an ambush. And here was this dog, also named Ethan, scarred from the same battlefield, carrying a service record tied to the same unit. The room seemed to close in on him as realization dawned. Could it be possible? Could this dog, this living, breathing creature lying at his feet, have been there in those final moments, standing beside his brother? Daniel turned toward the shepherd, who lifted his head, those calm, steady eyes locking onto his. The dog tilted his head slightly, as if sensing the storm raging inside him. With shaking hands, Daniel pulled out an old photograph from a box on his shelf. It was one of the last pictures he had of Ethan, taken just weeks before deployment. His brother stood tall in uniform, smiling broadly, one hand resting on the neck of a German shepherd. Daniel's heart lurched. The dog in the photo, the same calm eyes, the same dignified stance. It was him. The photo slipped from Daniel's grasp as he collapsed into the chair, sobs breaking free from a place he had kept locked for years. His body shook as he pressed his hands to his face, the weight of grief and revelation crashing over him like a wave. The shepherd rose quietly and padded over, pressing his head against Daniel's knee. His warmth, his presence, his steady breath anchored Daniel in the storm. He reached down, burying his fingers in the dog's fur, whispering through choked tears. "You were there. You were with him. You stayed with him to the end." The dog closed his eyes, releasing a soft, mournful whine that cut through Daniel's soul. It was as though the animal was confirming what Daniel already knew, as though he too carried the memory of Ethan, the soldier, in his heart. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift inside him. The guilt he had carried for so long began to loosen, not disappear entirely, but soften. His brother had not died alone. In his final moments, he had been accompanied by loyalty, by courage, by love in its purest form, and now by some unfathomable grace. That same loyalty had found its way back to Daniel. The discovery gnawed at Daniel for days. He could not look at the dog without remembering the photograph, without hearing the words of the service report echo in his head. Handler Kia Canine remained at side. Those words circled endlessly, stitching together the fragments of truth he had long avoided. The shepherd was not just a coincidence. He was not just a reminder. He was a living witness to Ethan's final moments. And yet, Daniel wrestled with what to do with that knowledge. A part of him felt crushed beneath the weight of it, reminded that his brother's death had not been a nightmare he could escape, but a brutal reality marked on the very body of this dog. But another part of him, fragile yet undeniable, began to feel something else: peace. The brother he had loved had not left this world alone. Someone, this noble, steadfast creature, had stayed by his side, refusing to abandon him. One Sunday morning, as the sun broke through the clouds in golden streaks, Daniel knew what he had to do. He clipped the leash to the shepherd's collar and whispered softly, "Come on, Ethan. We're going to see him." The drive to the cemetery felt endless. Daniel's chest tightened with every passing mile. His palms sweated against the steering wheel, and he found himself glancing at the dog in the passenger seat more often than the road. The shepherd sat calmly, his head slightly tilted as though he too understood the gravity of their destination. When they arrived, Daniel's legs felt weak beneath him. The cemetery stretched out in neat rows, each headstone a silent story of sacrifice. He had avoided coming here for months, unable to face the truth carved in stone. But today, with the shepherd by his side, he felt a strength he had not known he possessed. As they approached Ethan's grave, Daniel's steps faltered. His vision blurred with tears before he even reached it. The name Ethan Carter stood etched into the cold marble, final and unchanging. Daniel dropped to his knees, his body trembling as he traced the letters with his fingertips. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have been there. I should have protected you." The dam burst. Years of suppressed grief, guilt, and loneliness spilled out in ragged sobs. He pressed his forehead against the headstone, the earth beneath him damp with morning dew, his body shaking as he cried out everything he had carried in silence. Beside him, the shepherd lowered himself onto the grass. Slowly, with deliberate weight, the dog lay down against the headstone, resting his head gently at its base. A soft whimper escaped his throat, low, mournful, aching. Daniel froze, his breath catching. It was as though the dog recognized the name, the place, the weight of the moment. As though he, too, was mourning the soldier he had once stood beside. Something inside Daniel cracked open. He reached out, pulling the dog closer, burying his face in the shepherd's fur as tears streamed freely. "You stayed with him," he whispered, his voice shaking. "When I couldn't, you did. You never left him." The shepherd nuzzled against him, his steady warmth grounding Daniel in a way words never could. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the crushing guilt begin to lift, replaced by a profound, aching gratitude. His brother had been loved to the very end, not just by family, but by this loyal companion who had risked everything to protect him. They stayed there for hours, man and dog, in a silence heavy with grief, yet wrapped in something larger: connection, healing, and the quiet assurance that Ethan's spirit had not been forgotten. When Daniel finally stood, wiping his eyes, the world looked different. The weight on his shoulders had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a burden of guilt, but a mantle of honor, a responsibility to live in a way that honored both his brother's sacrifice and the loyalty of the dog who had shared it. As they walked back to the car, the shepherd stayed close at his side, his gait steady, his presence unshakable. Daniel glanced down at him and whispered, "Thank you for being there for him, and for being here for me now." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and though he could not answer, Daniel swore he saw understanding in those calm, unwavering eyes. The days after visiting the cemetery felt different. For the first time in years, Daniel woke without the crushing weight of despair pressing down on his chest. The nightmares still came, but when they did, there was always a steady warmth beside him, the shepherd lying close, his calm presence pulling Daniel back from the edge. The house no longer felt like a tomb of memories. It breathed again. The once silent rooms now carried the sound of paws padding across the floor, of claws clicking lightly on hardwood, of an occasional bark that startled Daniel before making him laugh. Small things began to change. Meals eaten at the table instead of alone on the couch. Mornings greeted with walks beneath the rising sun. Evenings spent not in silence, but in conversation with a companion who listened with his whole being. One morning, as Daniel clipped the leash onto the shepherd's collar, he paused. His fingers brushed against the old metal tagathon. He had considered removing it, afraid of reopening wounds each time he saw the name. But now, as he looked at it, he felt something else. Not pain, not despair, but pride. The tag was not just a reminder of loss. It was a symbol of loyalty, of courage, of two lives forever entwined, his brother's and this dog's. It was a story of sacrifice, and of love that reached beyond death. Daniel decided the tag would remain. It belonged there, as much a part of the shepherd's identity as it was of Ethan's memory. Over time, Daniel began sharing his story. At first, only with close friends, then later at community gatherings and veterans events. He spoke of his brother, of the grief that had nearly consumed him, and of the unexpected way healing had found him in the form of a loyal war dog with the same name. Each time he spoke, the shepherd sat at his side, calm and proud, a living testament to the bond between soldier and dog, between sacrifice and survival. Children would run up to pet him, and the dog would bow his head gently, patient and kind. Veterans would approach, some with tears in their eyes, and place their hands on the shepherd's back as though touching a piece of their own memories. Time and again, Daniel heard the same words. He saved more than just your brother. He's saving you too. And they were right. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Daniel sat on the porch with the shepherd at his feet. The cool breeze rustled the trees, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt at peace. He reached down, running his fingers through the dog's fur, and whispered, "You know, I think he'd be proud of both of us." The shepherd lifted his head, pressing it gently against Daniel's hand. No words were needed. The bond between them spoke louder than any language could. Daniel leaned back, watching the horizon. Life would never be the same. Grief had carved its mark into him, and the absence of his brother would always ache. But now, that ache no longer ruled him. It had been transformed into something enduring, a commitment to honor Ethan's memory, and a gratitude for the second chance at healing that had come in such an unexpected form. As the last light of the day faded, Daniel rose. "Come on, Ethan," he said softly. "Let's go home." The shepherd stood, steady and loyal, walking at his side. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel knew he was not walking into the emptiness of grief, but into the promise of a new beginning, one built on loyalty, love, and the quiet strength of a bond that would never be broken.